Out of the way, I now have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today, Maddie. Let's give Maddie a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. It's good to see you on this snowy holiday weekend. And hello to everyone who is joining us on the live stream. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Maddie. I'm the ministry assistant here at the River. Last week, Allison kicked off our new sermon series, Jesus Parables, Meeting God Through Story. So this is a sermon series where we're taking a look at the stories that Jesus told his followers about God and about how we live our lives and what those stories reveal to us about where God might be moving today. So Allison started off this series by explaining how to read the parables. She did some framing. She reminded us that a parable literally means to throw alongside. So it's a story that actually places two things side by side so that something new can come into view. And she drew on scholar Amy Jill Levine, who's a Bible scholar, and she emphasized that parables aren't just cute little moral lessons or tidy little allegories where every single detail has this one-to-one representative meaning. Parables are actually meant to slow us down. They're meant to get under our skin, to surprise us, to challenge us, and sometimes even to indict us. And to help us revive our ability to see and hear when our hearts have grown dull. So Allison invited us to approach these stories with an open mind, to linger long enough to notice what feels disturbing or resistant in us, and to then come back to them again and again, trusting that God can meet us a little bit differently each time. So, today I want to build on that by exploring one of my favorite passages in the gospel, and that's the purpose of parables. And I love this part of the gospel because it's the part where Jesus gets a little bit frustrated, and he realizes that what he's doing hasn't been working for everyone. And I relate to that a lot as someone who frequently gets frustrated and decides to totally pivot. I am the kind of person who starts to sweep my kitchen, and then you know that thing where you try to sweep the dust into the dustpan, but it doesn't get in there because it's too small? Yeah, I pivot when I'm 3/4 done, and I just Swiffer. I get mad, so I pivot a lot. I want to explore today why it is that Jesus decided to start telling a lot of parables about halfway through Matthew's gospel. And I also want to explore the parables that shape us and the people around us. What are the stories from our lives that lead us to the conclusion that certain things are obvious? And how can we use stories, especially Bible stories, to connect with people who really disagree with us about what is obvious? With that, I'm going to jump right in. So today's scripture comes from the center of the Gospel of Matthew. It's right in the middle. Jesus has been making his way through the towns along the Sea of Galilee, performing miracle healings and proclaiming his message to a growing band of followers. And these towns along the Sea of Galilee are not the most holy of places. These are towns like Capernaum, Bethsaida, Chorazin, and Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. So these are towns that are far away from Jerusalem, from the temple, from the Pharisees. It's where ordinary people live. These are like small farmers, fishermen, day laborers. So Jesus had been doing his ministry in these towns, and through that ministry had gained a following among these ordinary people because he was preaching a message that was pretty different from what they had heard from other religious leaders at the time. So the Jewish people of Galilee were used to hearing about all the different practices that they should be performing in order to stay faithful to the Hebrew scriptures. They were hearing, for example, that they should rest on the Sabbath, or that they should work to differentiate themselves from the Gentiles around them by keeping their food and bodies pure in important ways. Because many religious leaders at the time thought that that was the best way to honor the message of the Hebrew scriptures. But Jesus was coming in and saying, well, actually, that's not exactly what the Hebrew scriptures were trying to accomplish. He's saying that if you really want to embody the spirit of these scriptures, you have to read them a little bit differently. Sure, rest on the Sabbath, but if you see someone who's in pain or who's struggling and you can help them, don't let the Sabbath stop you. You should go and help. And on top of that, while it's important to honor our food and our bodies and to go against the grain of what the people around us are doing, that doesn't make any of us better than other people who do things differently. We shouldn't be so focused on differentiating ourselves from people who don't act like we do. We should be focused on serving them instead. So that's what the Hebrew scriptures are really about, Jesus says. They're about loving your neighbor. Sure, the Hebrew Bible says all of that stuff about resting on the Sabbath and food and bodies, but if you read the whole thing, it's pretty clear that the focus should be on loving our neighbors. And so he tries to embody that. He tries to really demonstrate that by going to Galilee, this not-so-holy place, and he heals people on the Sabbath, and he engages with all kinds of imperfect people who don't follow all the rules. These are Jewish people who maybe aren't as observant. They're kind of like, I go on holidays, but I don't know how I feel about the rest of it. And in addition to those Jewish people, there are some Gentiles among Jesus' followers who don't actually subscribe to the Hebrew scriptures at all. And that's pretty scandalous. And as he gains a following among these people, the Pharisees over in Jerusalem start to hear about this, and they come to Galilee to see what the commotion is about, and they don't like it. This man is out here claiming he's the Son of God and saying all kinds of things about the supposedly true meaning of the Hebrew scriptures, and they could not disagree more. He's reading these scriptures in a totally different way, and to them it's blasphemy, it's heretical, they want him gone. So Matthew writes that the Pharisees actually went out and conspired against him. They conspired on how to destroy him. Quick sidebar here. As always, whenever we talk about Pharisees, it's important to acknowledge that tropes about Pharisees have been used anti-Semitically. Demonizing Pharisees by taking their viewpoints out of historical context has been a way that some Christians have demonized all Jewish people. And we can sometimes forget that the conflict that I'm describing here between Jesus and the Pharisees is a debate that was happening at the time within Judaism, and Jesus was not the only Jewish person at the time who was critiquing the Pharisees for reading scripture in a very specific way. We can also forget that the Pharisees had some valid reasons for approaching things in the way they did, which I'll get into a little later. If you're interested in diving into more specifics about who the Pharisees were, you can check out this podcast with Bible scholar Amy Jo Levine from the Bible for Normal People. It's called Who Are the Pharisees, actually? Okay, that was a quick sidebar. Now we're going to get back into it. So what does Jesus do after he hears that the Pharisees are coming after him? First, he gets away from them for a moment and continues to heal people and cast out demons and share his thoughts about God with his followers. So he's still doing all of that. But soon after that, Jesus pivots. He tries something new that he's tried a little of before, but he hasn't really doubled down on it. So he goes to the Sea of Galilee, and he gets in a boat. And all of his followers are there spread out along the beach. And he's in this boat, and he's standing, and he turns to face them as they're standing out on this beach. And he starts to tell them parables. Now, why is this a big deal? This is the first time in the Gospel of Matthew when Jesus really sits down and tries to teach people what he's all about using primarily parables. So there are a couple of parables that happen before this in Matthew, but this is the first time when Jesus is really stepping aside to focus on parables as his primary strategy for getting across his message. So there are a lot of parables in this chapter of Matthew, some of which you may never have heard of. They are not popular. Some of them are, some of them are not. So there's the parable of the sower, which you've probably heard of, the parable of the weeds, the parable of the mustard seed and the yeast, the parable of the hidden treasure and the pearl, that's a less popular one, and the parable of the net. I don't think we normally teach that one. Maybe some of you have heard of it. So he's tried a few other ways of getting his message across before this. He's already delivered a Sermon on the Mount that summarized all of his core teachings. That was Matthew chapters 5 through 7. It's 3 whole chapters in Matthew, is just this one sermon. And that sermon has in it like things like turn the other cheek and treat others like you want to be treated and judge not lest ye be judged. So he's tried sermons before, and that got some people interested in following along. And he's also tried miracle healings. A lot of people like that. The people love a good miracle, especially when it heals a person who's sick. So we got some followers out of that. And then there were other people who started to pay attention when he started casting out demons. They thought that was pretty cool. That seemed like evidence that this man might have something valuable to say, might even be the Son of God as he claimed. But clearly that wasn't enough for many people. The Pharisees, for example, had heard and seen all of that, and they were not impressed. It just made them mad. And so this is the part of the gospel where Jesus decides that he needs to try something else. He stops what he's doing, he gets in the boat, he faces this beach full of people, and he starts to tell parables. And the first one that he tells is the parable of the sower. That's the one about a man who spilled some seeds out on a path, and the ones that fell on rocks or thorns didn't grow into anything, but the ones that fell on good soil sprouted up and yielded a lot of grain. And there are a few different interpretations of this parable, but one interpretation of this parable is that it's a metaphor for what it's like for Jesus to try to spread his message to people, right? There are a lot of people who just don't want to hear what he has to say, and so his message isn't going to sprout anything in them, even if he gives them a sermon or shows them a miracle. But the people who are open to hearing what he has to say, they're giving him some good soil to work with. Something might come from that. Something new might grow in them. So Jesus tells this parable, and immediately the disciples are confused. What is he doing? What's with the parables? And they ask him, why do you speak in parables? And when I read that, I don't think they're just confused. They're annoyed. They're out here putting themselves at huge risk. Various people, as we know, are plotting to destroy this man who they've left their families to follow. They've given up everything to follow someone who might soon be dead. And maybe that risk seemed worth it to them when he was being serious, when he was giving sermons or healing people or casting out demons. But now he's taking a step back from that important work to tell stories right now when people are coming after them. Wouldn't right now be the right time to fight back? Wouldn't right now be the time to show the Pharisees that Jesus and his movement are not to be messed with? Why isn't he doing something? Why isn't he saying something directly? Why is he speaking in parables? That's not what serious people with a serious message worth seriously defending do. But Jesus responds to them. He says, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing, they do not perceive, and hearing, they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, you will indeed listen, but never understand, and you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they might not look with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. What's he saying here? He's saying that his message that he's been repeating ad nauseum for his entire ministry isn't obvious to everyone. Sure, some people hear it and immediately get it and are on board, like the disciples, because they're predisposed to hear it. Something about their experience of the world and their experience of God made them open and receptive to what Jesus had to say. It was easy for them to hear Jesus' message. It might not have been easy for them to give up their lives and follow him, but it was easy for them to see God in him. But it's not that easy for everyone. It's not easy for the Pharisees or their followers or for a lot of other people. It's scary. This man is out here questioning things that are really important to them. And in the process, he's actually putting them all in danger. What the Pharisees see is Jesus putting the Jewish people at risk, because the Pharisees know that if the Romans hear that the Jewish people are getting riled up with these crazy new ideas, they're going to come in and lay down the law. They're going to show the Jewish people who's really in charge. The government is going to come and start executing people. So the Pharisees can't afford to have Jesus creating a ruckus. This isn't just about maintaining their own power or preserving tradition. It's actually about protecting their entire community from the imperial government. So they had a bit of a point. So why parables then? What are parables going to do? Jesus quotes the Hebrew Bible here. He quotes the prophet Isaiah. He says, "You will indeed listen, but never understand, and you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes so that they might not look with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them." And I would heal them. Jesus has been performing miracle healings. He's been healing the sick, but he's realized that if he's going to get his message across to people, that's not enough. He needs to actually heal the divide between him and these people who are not open to hearing what he has to say. He's acknowledging here that this message that seems so obvious to him and to his disciples is not obvious to everyone. He's acknowledging that there are many people who are reading the Hebrew scriptures and who are looking around at the situation of the Jewish people in the Roman Empire, and to them, it's obvious that Jesus is not only wrong, he's dangerous. And I'm thinking about all of the different ways that Jesus could have chosen to respond to that reality, right? He could have written those people off. He could have said, if you don't like what I have to say, good riddance. I'm done dealing with people who aren't open to hearing me. I'm done dealing with people who are trying to come after me, right? That sounds reasonable. He could have just kept on doing what he was doing, giving sermons, doing miracles. Clearly, some people were into it, right? He could have just stuck with those people. Who cares about the rest of them? Going off about the Pharisees was clearly a popular thing to do in Galilee. It seemed to be getting him followers. It would have made sense in a way to continue just going after those people. He could build a movement of all the people who were upset with the Pharisees. That could be his whole brand niche. He could be the anti-Pharisee guy. And some Christians view Jesus that way, but I think that's a misread. And I think this section of Matthew really demonstrates why. Jesus could have become just the anti-Pharisee guy, or honestly, he could have stopped what he was doing altogether. I mean, people were planning to destroy him. Isn't that a sign that it might be time to retire? Couldn't he have joined a pickleball league or taken up canasta? Should have gotten out of the game. It was time. But he didn't do that. He looked at these people who were afraid of him and who wanted him gone and said, and I would heal them. What does he mean by that? He means he's going to try to speak their language. The parable of the sower that he just told, that's actually a direct reference to a few different parts of the Hebrew scriptures. The Hebrew scriptures use images of seeds and sowing and reaping all of the time. And so when Jesus tells the parable of the sower, he's trying to express his frustration about people's inability to hear his message in language that they can hear. He's saying to them, look, see, I'm not a threat, I promise. I'm out here reading the same scripture you are, and I believe it, just like you. I believe it so much that I'm going to use it to tell you what I have to say. You don't have to shut me out. You can give me a chance because I'm one of you, even though it might not seem that way. And I think we want the same thing. What I'm saying might not be obvious to you, but I'm not writing you off. I've been thinking this week about all the things that seem obvious to me. I grew up in a family that was very understated, if that makes sense. They weren't into big displays of emotion. They weren't very particularly talkative people. And they don't like to make a scene or a fuss about anything. They keep it very low key. Some of you might have come from families like that. One of my dad's favorite sayings when I was growing up was, "Those who say do not know, those who know do not say." It's a good one. That was his way of saying, we don't trust people who talk a big game about what they know or what they have or what they can do. Serious people let their actions speak for themselves. And that ethos was really at the foundation of a parable that has shaped my family and my life. So some of you know this story about my family. My dad came from very humble beginnings, and so in college, he put his head down and worked really hard to become a corporate lawyer, in part so that he could support his family. And he ended up as an associate at the #2 law firm in the world, Latham & Watkins, and he was on track to have a successful career as a lawyer. But a couple of weeks after I was born, my dad very unexpectedly made an impulsive decision. It was very unlike him. He was sitting in his boss's office, and he overheard his boss get a call from a man named Alan Rothenberg. Alan was a lawyer who ran the U.S. Soccer Federation, which is an organization that sponsors the U.S. men's national team and the women's national team, all the national teams. And Alan had convinced FIFA to bring the 1994 World Cup to the United States. But as part of that World Cup bid, he had promised FIFA that he would launch an American soccer league. The previous league, the National American Soccer League, had folded in the 1970s because it had failed as a business. So at that time, there was no professional soccer league in America. But Alan thought he could use the World Cup to generate some soccer excitement in the US that he could use to launch a new professional soccer league. So he called my dad's boss that day because he was looking for another lawyer to come help him write the business plan for his new league. But when my dad overheard the call between Alan and his boss, he got up, he ran down 4 flights of stairs, and he begged Alan to let him write the business plan. And that's how my dad quit his job a couple of weeks after I was born to go and start Major League Soccer. He was the first employee. He's been with the league since day one. And so I spent my childhood watching Major League Soccer go from being the butt of every possible joke about Americans playing soccer to becoming actually a very successful, serious sports league that attracts star players from around the world. People thought this league would never launch or that it would fold within a couple of years. But it's been around for 30 years now, and it's only getting better every season. I sometimes call Major League Soccer my sibling that gets more attention than me. No, I love it. You might be thinking to yourself, that doesn't sound like a very understated parable. That sounds pretty dramatic. But that's not what I took away from it growing up. My dad's been called all kinds of things by a lot of different people. He's been criticized for being too cautious or risk-averse or conservative in the way that he's approached building and expanding this league. But if you asked him, he would tell you that that's why MLS has survived where the previous league failed. It's been successful because the league has been focused on being consistent and measured and has executed well on the fundamentals. It's been slow and steady, because the game speaks for itself. So that's what the parable of Major League Soccer taught me growing up. It taught me that when you do something big, something dramatic, something that seems impossible, you put your head down and you execute. Slow and steady. You don't need to be flashy about it. You need to be consistent and let the work speak for itself. Which is why in 2016, when Donald Trump became the Republican Party's nominee for president, it was so obvious to me that he shouldn't be the president. I know there's a trend on Instagram where we're all posting pictures of ourselves from 2016. So that's Donald Trump and me in 2016. I was working for the Hillary campaign in New Hampshire. So that's me in my New Hampshire for Hillary shirt. And Donald Trump is anything but understated, right? He's always bragging. He's always talking himself up. He's always talking about how successful and smart and powerful he is. And I didn't agree with his policy agenda or what existed of it during the 2016 campaign, But even before that, his general demeanor was just so at odds with everything that I had been raised to respect about people that I was immediately turned off by him. I was certainly rocky soil for whatever seeds he was trying to sow, because to me, he was the epitome of those who say do not know. He struck me as a scammer because he's not someone who lets the work speak for itself. He's all about the show, right? And so when he won the election, I had to reckon with the reality that what was obvious to me was not obvious to many voters in this country. In fact, to many voters, the opposite was obvious, right? Understated people are the problem. Understated people downplay the problems of the working class. They accept the status quo. They're willing to settle for a system that isn't working. Understated people aren't going to change anything. To many voters, it was obvious that the only person who was going to actually have the courage and the power and the follow-through to shake things up was a loud billionaire who wasn't beholden to the political establishment and who wasn't afraid to say whatever was on his mind. What do we do with that? What do we do in a world where what's obvious to us is the opposite of what's obvious to so many other people? And what do we do when that creates a political situation that becomes increasingly scary? What do we do when the government starts to come for people? What do we do when the government kills someone in broad daylight? I don't think that there's one correct biblical response to the current moment. There are people out in the streets protesting right now, and I think that that's biblical. There are people who are going into hiding right now and who are attempting to care for and to hide others, and I think that's biblical. I think that there's room for a variety of biblical responses to what's happening right now in our country, and that different people can play different roles, but I think it's worth it to seriously consider right now whether it might be your role to speak in parables to people who aren't perceiving, listening, or understanding what's happening. So what do I mean by that? I mean that 72% of white Christians voted for this president, and many are supportive of his agenda to violently round up and detain and deport tens of millions of people, often indiscriminately, illegally, and without due process. These people have seen what this president has done so far. They've heard the arguments against him, and they're not swayed. What we've done so far hasn't worked to convince them. And sometimes I think it would be easier to give up on them and to say, we're done with you. But at the end of the day, they live here too, and they vote. And I don't know that turning our backs on them is going to stop any of this from happening. I don't think there are easy answers. I don't think this is a straightforward situation. But there are moments when it feels like one of the best things we can do is pray that God might be saying, and I will heal them. Here at the River, we read the Bible pretty differently from many of the people who support this president's agenda. We believe that if you read the whole thing, it's really about loving your neighbor. And some Christians feel pretty threatened by that. That can sound scary when you grew up learning that something else was obvious. But at the end of the day, we're reading the same Bible, and that means that we've been given a language that maybe one day they will hear. We can share a parable with them, not to proof text or to show them that we know more than they do, but instead to make a bid for connection, to try to heal a little bit of this divide between us. We can share a parable as a way of saying, look, see, I'm not a threat, I promise. I'm out here reading the same scripture you are, and I believe it just like you. I believe it so much that I'm going to use it to tell you what I have to say. You don't have to shut me out. you can give me a chance because I'm one of you, even though it might not seem that way. And I think we want the same thing. What I'm saying might not be obvious to you, but I'm not writing you off. Because at the end of the day, I've been blessed with ears to hear certain parts of Jesus' message really well, but not every part. It's easy for me to hear that what ICE is currently doing is the opposite of loving your neighbor. I'm good soil for that one. But it's less easy for me to hear that my upbringing makes me less sensitive to the concerns of working class people, right? It's not easy for me to hear that being understated isn't always the best or most effective way to bring about change. That there might be times when the gospel calls us to be disruptive. I might be rocky or thorny soil for that part. I sometimes wonder if I were alive in Jesus' time, if I would have been totally on board with everything he was up to. Would I have been good soil back then? I don't know. And so as frustrating and sad as it is that there are many people out there who hold some views that I find obviously abhorrent and that are doing quite a bit of harm, I often need to remind myself that I need grace just as much as they do. And while not all views are the same, we are all on journeys to be able to better hear the gospel. I know I need help with that sometimes, and in moments when I'm feeling strong enough to do it, I hope that I can help others to do that too. So with that, I want to close us out with 3 practical suggestions. First, write out a parable that's shaped you. This has actually been a hugely helpful one for me. So there are certain things that are obvious to each of us that maybe aren't as obvious to everyone else. Connecting with other people and healing the divides between us often requires understanding first how it is that we came to certain values, preferences, or beliefs. What kinds of people are you drawn to and why? And what kinds of people instinctively turn you off? What stories from your life might help you or a stranger understand how you came to your worldview? I found that writing this out has been healing for me and has made conversations across difference a lot easier. When I'm able to separate myself from the stories that shape me, it's easy for me to attempt to empathize with other people's experience. My second suggestion is to ask someone for a parable that's shaped them. So imagine for a moment that you grew up differently. What experiences might shape someone to believe the opposite of what you believe? You might reflect on specific people in your life who do believe something very different from you. And if you feel comfortable, you might even ask them how they came to believe those things. People often try to explain their views with facts or other kinds of reasoning, but research shows that most people are pretty emotionally driven. All of us are. So it might be helpful to specifically ask for stories from their upbringing or their life that might explain why they believe what they believe. Third, pick a parable from the Bible to meditate on. There are somewhere between 35 and 46 parables in the Gospels, depending on what you count as a parable. You can easily Google and find one, but if you want me to assign you one, you can try the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. And when you read whatever parable you've chosen, I want you to reflect on what's easy for you to hear from that parable and what might be harder for you to hear. What's obvious to you and what might be obvious to someone else. I know that in the face of all that's going on, these things might seem silly or small or unimportant. What are parables going to do in the midst of all this? Shouldn't we do something more? Or alternatively, what if there's nothing left that we can do? What if a parable's not even worth the trouble? Do we have to engage in this kind of thing? These are big questions with complicated answers that really are specific to your own situation. But in general, I like to believe that 3 things are true. 1, I think that we're all compelled to do something in the face of injustice. That is part of what it means to follow Jesus. But 2, we can't do everything, and not everything is ours to do. We all have different roles to play. So we have to choose wisely. And 3, in a moment when things were looking pretty dark, Jesus thought that the best use of his time was to tell parables. So if that's what you choose to do, you're in good company. If you're looking to dive more into the specifics of how to engage in conversations across difference or how we can respond as Christians in this political moment, consider taking a look at some of the books in our library. That should be next slide. Here we go. Some of the books in our library that dive into these topics in more depth than I can in a sermon. We have many more books than just these, but this is a smattering for such a time as this by my professor, Hannah Reichel. It specifically addresses this current political moment using examples from Nazi Germany, actually, and everyday stories of what people did during that time. It's a really interesting book. And then these 3 other books, Do You Still Talk to Grandma? I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Still Listening, and I Never Thought of It That Way, are all very practical guides for approaching conversation across difference and making bids for connection, even and especially when that is hard. We have many more books along these lines in our library, but these are a few, and you can always go check it out and speak to our librarian, Lucius, if you're looking to learn more. With that, we have been closing out our sermons in this series with a little exercise in the end. I am not going to have you all dive into really deep political parable discussion with one another, don't worry. But I do think it would be nice for us to be able to practice sharing a story with one another. So we're going to do a low stakes one. If you could turn to someone near you and share a story about a favorite dish, a favorite food or a favorite dish that you grew up with as a way of making a bid for connection, I invite you to do that now for the next few minutes. Thanks.